Firstly, I do want to apologize. I do have a cold today, so if I end up coughing a little, please bear with me. Second thing, this deck is really special to me and my team. You know, we go around the world talking about institutions in crypto. I want to thank all the institutional partners here taking an interest in the Indian blockchain space. I think this is how we move forward. Typically, when I give this talk, you know, we usually talk about, you know, Wormhole, how Wormhole impacts the Solana ecosystem. This talk I want to dedicate to you guys. I want to talk about how you can make an impact on the blockchain space, especially in India. I want to start this off with a question. Do you guys know what the market cap of crypto is right now? Anyone? 5 trillion? No, it's 4.3, pretty close. You know, if you think about it in terms of how we've evolved over the past 5 or 10 years, it sounds absolutely absurd that the crypto industry is 4.3 trillion. But if you compare it to other traditional industries, it's not that big. The way forward is to bring these markets on the blockchain, you know, insurance, debt markets, real estate, gold, stock markets, derivatives, which kind of is on chain. But if you think about it in the TradFi world, it's a trillion dollar volume market, which is absolutely absurd. If you think about some of these biggest funds like Vanguard, Fidelity, Brookfield, some of their biggest funds in terms of what they're getting capital inflow into, they're a fraction of the crypto traditional market. There's a huge opportunity for institutions, especially in India, to come on the blockchain and make an impact, help this industry move forward, and create opportunities that are not available to traditional Indian retail investors. I think this is probably where it becomes a little bit more, you know, self-explanatory. You know, one thing that my team was sort of joking about, you know, what would we say tokenization is in Hindi? They came up with Sikka Karan. I don't know if that's something we want to use. But yeah, tokenization is essentially bringing assets onto the blockchain so that they can be traded. You know, if you think about the Indian stock exchange, we only trade from 9 to 3:30. The Japanese stock exchange, they take a lunch hour. You know, I think that's absolutely absurd that they stop the trading for an hour. Even if you think about sort of the impacts that some of these bigger investors have, they have access to pre-markets. They have access to post-markets. They have access to hedging, things that normal retail investors just don't have access to. And even if they do have access to, the fees that they accrue to make these things possible are absolutely absurd. So why should institutions come on chain? You know, I think we're at a point where this is where financial history is being made. You know, I was giving this talk in Korea. The Korean government is really interested in this. Wormhole, as a protocol, we work with some of the biggest institutions in the space like BlackRock, Apollo Global, Van Eck, KKR, Securitize, Janus Henderson Fund. All of them sort of come back to these 5-6 points. There's greater liquidity. There are no global borders in terms of who can invest into these assets. There's real-time settlement. And I think what's most important to me, I think 24/7 markets. I think the peace of mind of being able to take out your position on a Saturday or Sunday or off markets is absolutely intense for a retail investor. I sort of covered this in the last slide, but in terms of what you know, I think an Indian regulator can do or an Indian institution can do is think about how we can enable, you know, like for example, my dad invests in a lot of mutual funds, but when we talk to their mutual fund provider in terms of how he can take a loan against his mutual fund, surprisingly, they have to pay 25% LTV per quarter to actually sustain that loan credit, which is absolutely absurd. Contrary to, you know, we had the last speaker talk about pump fund, you know, a lot of people talking about meme coins. Tokenizing assets on the blockchain, not that easy. You know, this is sort of the flow that we worked with the Biddle Fund. This is BlackRock's tokenized fund on the blockchain. There are like 10 different steps. I think one takeaway here, something that we've learned working with all these institutions is you need to find a partner that you can trust and work with them really closely in terms of what you want to achieve coming onto the blockchain. This is sort of where Wormhole comes into the picture. You know, this is sort of our one-liner. Wormhole is a digital asset network that connects scaling tokenized assets onto all blockchains. Historically, we've seen a lot of funds, a lot of big institutions want to tokenize on Ethereum. That's slowly been changing. Our team was in Japan earlier the year, and a lot of Japanese banks want to issue assets directly on Solana. A lot of Korean banks want to issue assets directly on Solana. Our view, and this is something that we'd assume is unanimously a take amongst all the partners that help with tokenization, we believe that you need to pick a home chain in terms of, BlackRock chose Ethereum, VanEck chose Ethereum, but you need to focus on what comes after. You need to figure out how you go to your users in terms of what they want and figure out what you can enable for them. And that's sort of where the convergence of DeFi and TradFi comes into the picture. I want to leave you with this thought. The market cap of tokenized assets has gone up 2x year to date, which is absolutely crazy. And it's still about $30, $40 billion, which is nothing. The opportunity here is for an institutional partner to come in and think about how we can converge TradFi and DeFi. These are 3 examples of Wormhole issued assets like BIDO, SACred, working with some of the bigger DeFi partners in the space. So BIDO and Athena worked on a collab. They issued USDTB, which is at about $1.5 billion. SCred and Morpho. Essentially what this means is if I am an investor in ACred, I can then go to Morpho, which is the lending protocol, and then loop my strategy. So essentially I can take a loan against my position, I can reinvest back, which essentially gives the retail investor a higher risk margin based on what they want to do. The third thing that we've been working on is SCred and Drift. Drift is a perpetual trading protocol. Essentially, when you want to trade perpetual futures in crypto, you need to give a baseline asset so that you can protect the trades, and it's basically collateral. So if you have an RWA, which is risk averse, 4-5%, and you're providing that in terms of what you can do on the blockchain, it creates an immense market. I feel like there are a lot more things that Indian institutions can do. There are things that are not accessible to normal retail users, like trading oil futures on chain, the mutual fund looping strategy I was talking about. If you want to do cross-border payments, not possible. If you want to invest in mutual funds in any other country, very, very hard as an Indian retail investor. The other flip side to that is think about how we can bring inward investments into India. How can an NRI invest back into India? How can a foreign national invest back into India? How can they buy real estate easier? How can they invest into stocks easier? How can they invest into the Nifty easier? This blockchain revolution, it's going to change the way that we interact with money and the way that we think about money. And an institution partner coming in early and saying, we are going to drive how we see this industry going forward is going to change the way Indian retail investors interact with everything. BlackRock's already come in. Some of the biggest institutional partners in the States have come in and set the benchmark in terms of this is okay to do. US regulation's gotten better. Our finance minister the other day talked about stablecoins as well. Regulation is just going to get better. An Indian institutional partner coming in early and saying we are going to drive the strategy, we're going to drive how adoption looks like, would change how every Indian thinks about blockchain technology. I'm Rachit Agarwal. Thank you so much for listening.